So when we were talking about virtue ethics, you might have thought to yourself, well, does this really tell me how to choose the right action? And so a lot of people have asked this question, is it helpful when we're trying to choose between two actions to ask what a virtuous person would do? Can we even make sense of that? And is it enough when you're asking whether something's right or wrong to appeal to what a virtuous person would do? So virtue ethicists have tried to answer this question by appealing to the virtues themselves and saying, well, you don't have to ask what a virtuous person would do. You can ask, is this action an example of being honest, being courageous, etc., etc.? Does this help? Don't know. I mean, it might still make some moral dilemmas difficult to follow. Is it helpful in the example we're trying to decide whether to order the steak or the salad to ask which action is more just? It doesn't seem to be a very clear guide in this instance, at least, to ask which action is more just or which is better in sort of trying to appeal to a particular virtue. Can we even figure out which virtue we should apply in this situation? Is this a situation for the virtue of justice or a different virtue? How are we to determine that? There's also the charge that it's unrealistic, telling people, oh, you need to be this kind of person. It might not be possible for everybody. It might be better to have ethics be a guide to action that can be followed by anyone. And it doesn't require you to develop a certain kind of character. Maybe that's too much to ask of people. So Talbot Brewer has said that, well, you know, the idea of rightness and wrongness isn't really about individual actions anyway. Virtue ethics is not really about trying to determine which action is correct anyway. It's a way of life, and this is what Aristotle and Plato say. It's really a way of life. It's really supposed to be about being a good person, and maybe that is what ethics should be, rather than trying to evaluate any individual action. So he kind of says that people making these claims are missing the point. Elizabeth Anscombe and other people have come up with this idea of sort of V rules, and this is, okay, we can have a set of rules, but they just appeal to the virtues, like we talked about before a little bit. Do what is honest and not what is dishonest. So, you figure out what action you should do by following a V rule, a rule of looking at the virtue that applies to the action and then doing it, as we sort of talked about earlier. And again, this is perhaps easier said than done, because we have to figure out which virtue applies to a certain situation and then whether that action fits with that virtue or not. So these kinds of problems dog the virtue theorists. We just have to decide, I guess, what we think morality is. Is morality going to be trying to be a good person in a particular way, or is it sort of a formula for anybody to figure out what action is right in a particular situation, whether they're a good person or not? They can follow this formula. And it's probably one of those questions that's never going to be answered, because you can't really split the difference too well, though a lot of people have tried to do that. You kind of have to decide what you think ethics should be.